The courtyard of the Romano estate was silent, eerily so. The morning sun glittered off polished black cars lined up like soldiers, and the air carried the scent of roses mixed with something darker. Gun oil and fear. Then came the scream. Little Isabella Romano stood frozen on the cobblestones, her wide blue eyes trembling with confusion. Beside her, Rosa, the young maid in her navy uniform, knelt with something small, dark, and twitching held between her shaking fingers. The butler gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Rosa, what have you done?" Heavy footsteps echoed through the archway. Vincenzo Romano, the man whose name could silence entire cities, stepped into the sunlight. His face, usually carved from stone, went pale as he saw his daughter's tear-streaked face. "What in God's name are you doing to my child?" His voice thundered across the driveway like a gunshot. Rosa's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the thing in her palm. "Sir, I swear on my life," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't hurt her. I was only trying to help." "Help?" Vincenzo's voice cracked like a whip. "You touched my daughter? You went near her without permission." Rosa slowly opened her palm. Inside it lay something no one in that courtyard had ever seen before. Something wet, dark, and glistening unnaturally under the Italian sun. The bodyguards took a step back. The butler's face went white. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The silence was suffocating, until a small, broken sound shattered it. "Papa," came from Isabella, the same girl who had been born completely deaf. The same child who had never spoken a single word in 6 years of life. For a moment the world stopped turning. Vincenzo's breath caught in his throat. His eyes locked on his daughter's lips as they moved again, forming sounds he'd only dreamed of hearing. "Papa." It's loud. And that was when the most feared mafia boss in Naples realized that a simple maid had just done what millions of dollars never could. Dear viewers, this is not your typical mafia story. This is a story about a father feared by all, but powerless to heal the one person he loved most. And about a maid who dared to do what no doctor, no priest, and no amount of money could ever accomplish. Stay with me until the end, because what happened next would change the Romano family forever. Before I continue, if you have not, please kindly subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment where you are watching from and what time it's at your end. Now let's continue. The Romano mansion stood on the outskirts of Naples like a fortress, a palace of marble, iron gates, and secrets that never left its walls. Every corner gleamed with wealth. Every chandelier sparkled like diamonds. Yet something felt missing. The house was vast, but it carried an emptiness no amount of gold could fill. Servants moved like shadows from room to room, careful not to disturb the silence. They said the master of the house, Vincenzo Romano, liked it that way. But they were wrong. Vincenzo Romano didn't like silence. He feared it, because in his world of power and control, the one thing he could never command was his daughter's voice. Vincenzo Romano was a name whispered in back rooms and dark alleys across Naples. He was the Don, the man who ruled the city from behind closed doors and tinted windows. His empire was built on loyalty, fear, and an unspoken rule. Betrayal meant death. Mistakes meant vanishing without a trace. Men twice his age bowed when he entered a room. Politicians returned his calls within minutes. Even the police knew better than to look too closely at his affairs. But all that power, all that control couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. His daughter, Isabella, was 6 years old. She had never heard a bird sing, never heard her father's voice, never spoken a single word. She had been born completely deaf. For years, Vincenzo had done what he did best. He threw money at the problem. Doctors flew in from Rome, specialists from Paris, experimental treatments from Zurich. Each one arrived with confidence and left with apologies. "I'm sorry, Mr. Romano. There's nothing we can do. The damage is too severe. Perhaps with time, but I cannot promise anything." He remembered the last specialist, a German surgeon with cold eyes and expensive shoes, who had examined Isabella for 3 hours before finally shaking his head. Her auditory nerves show no response whatsoever. It's as if they're blocked. "But I've never seen anything like this before." Vincenzo had paid him anyway, then never called him again. The weight of it all crushed him in ways bullets and betrayal never could. His wife, Luciana, had died giving birth to Isabella. Complications, they said. Internal bleeding. There was nothing they could do. Vincenzo had held his daughter for the first time in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and death, and he'd whispered a promise to the woman he loved. "I'll take care of her. I swear it." But he hadn't kept that promise. Not really. He had given Isabella everything. A beautiful room, the finest tutors, toys from around the world. But he couldn't give her sound. He couldn't give her the one thing every father dreams of hearing. His child calling his name. Some nights, he would stand in the doorway of her room and watch her sleep, wondering if God was punishing him, wondering if this silence was payment for all the blood on his hands. He could silence nations, but he couldn't break the silence inside his own home. Tonight was one of those nights. Vincenzo sat in the small chair beside Isabella's bed. His expensive suit wrinkled, his tie loosened. She was asleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. A stuffed rabbit lay tucked under her arm. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. "One day, piccola mia," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "One day you'll hear me. One day you'll say my name, and I'll know what my own daughter's voice sounds like." His words hung in the air, unanswered. He kissed her forehead softly and stood, his shadow stretching long across the wall. As he walked toward the door, his footsteps echoed through the quiet hallway. The silence followed him like a ghost. Downstairs, the grandfather clock in the entrance hall chimed softly. Outside, the iron gates creaked open, and through the front door, carrying a small suitcase and wearing a modest dress, walked a young woman with kind eyes and calloused hands. Rosa Alvarez had just arrived at the Romano mansion. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Rosa Alvarez stood in the grand entrance hall of the Romano mansion, her small suitcase clutched in both hands, her eyes taking in the impossible wealth surrounding her. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls above her head. Marble floors stretched endlessly in every direction, polished so perfectly she could see her reflection staring back. A young woman in a simple dress, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, her hands rough from years of work. She looked humble, polite, grateful for the opportunity. But beneath that calm exterior, Rosa carried a pain she never spoke about. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Caruso, led her through the mansion with brisk efficiency. "You'll clean the east wing daily. Dust every surface. Don't touch anything valuable. Don't speak unless spoken to. And most importantly," she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper, "never look Mr. Romano directly in the eye. Understand?" Rosa nodded quietly. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You start tomorrow at dawn." That night, lying on the narrow bed in her small room behind the kitchen, Rosa stared at the ceiling and thought of home. Her real home. A tiny coastal town where the sea breeze smelled like salt and fish, where children played barefoot in the streets, and where her little sister Elena used to laugh at everything. Elena had been only 8 years old when the fever started. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a cold, maybe the flu. But then came the ear infection. Elena would cry through the night, holding the side of her head, tears streaming down her small face. "It hurts, Rosa," she would whisper. "Make it stop." Rosa had begged their mother to take her to the hospital, but the doctors demanded payment up front. Money they didn't have. They tried home remedies, prayer, borrowed medicine from neighbors. Nothing worked. Within a week, Elena stopped responding. Her eyes grew distant. The infection had spread. And then, one quiet morning, she was gone. Rosa had held her sister's cold hand and made a promise through her tears. "Never again. I'll never let another child suffer like this. Never." That promise had brought her here, to this mansion, to this job. She needed the money, but more than that, she needed to feel like she was doing something that mattered. The next morning, Rosa began her work. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, cleaning, polishing, staying invisible. She learned quickly. Speak only when necessary, keep your head down, don't ask questions. But on her third day, she saw Isabella. The little girl was sitting by a tall window in the library, her small frame silhouetted against the morning light. She wasn't reading. She wasn't playing. She was just sitting, staring out at the garden with empty, expressionless eyes. Rosa paused mid-step, her hand still holding the feather duster. There was something about the way Isabella sat, so still, so alone, that made Rosa's chest tighten. She knew that loneliness. She had seen it in Elena's eyes during those final days when the fever stole her sister away from the world. From that moment, Rosa couldn't look away. She began to notice everything. How Isabella never turned when someone entered the room. How she communicated only through gestures and drawings. How the other servants kept their distance, treating her more like a fragile object than a child. One evening, after finishing her duties, Rosa made a decision. She took a piece of paper from the kitchen and folded it carefully into a small origami bird. It wasn't perfect. Her hands weren't trained for such delicate work, but she made it with care. She placed it gently on Isabella's pillow. The next morning, the bird was gone. Rosa smiled. The following night, she left a small chocolate wrapped in gold foil, then a simple drawing of a flower, then another origami shape, this time a star. Slowly, something began to change. One afternoon, while Rosa was cleaning the hallway windows, she found a piece of paper slipped under her door. On it was a child's drawing, a stick figure with long hair. Rosa? She realized, standing next to a smaller stick figure holding a bird. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She pressed the drawing to her chest. From then on, their silent friendship grew. When Rosa passed Isabella in the hallways, the little girl would wave shyly. When Rosa cleaned near her playroom, Isabella would come closer, watching her reflection in the glass, then waving when Rosa waved back. One day, Isabella laughed, silently, holding her stomach with both hands, when Rosa accidentally dropped a feather duster and it landed on her head like a strange hat. It was the first time anyone in the mansion had seen the girl truly smile. But not everyone was pleased. "She's getting too close," one of the maids whispered in the kitchen. "The boss won't like it." The butler frowned, stirring his coffee. "She should know her place. We're here to serve, not to bond." But Rosa didn't care what they said. She had seen loneliness before, had lived with it, lost someone to it. She wasn't going to turn away now. One evening, after dinner service, Rosa was walking past the library when she noticed Isabella sitting under a lamp, her small hand pressed against her ear. The girl's face was scrunched in discomfort, her eyes squeezed shut. Rosa stopped. Isabella scratched at her ear again, wincing. Rosa's heart began to race. She stepped closer, watching carefully. The little girl scratched again. Harder this time, her fingers digging as if trying to reach something deep inside. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. Her mind flashed back to Elena, to those final days, to the infection no one had treated in time. She knelt slowly beside Isabella, her voice soft. "Does it hurt, Tesoro?" Isabella couldn't hear her, but she looked up, her blue eyes wet with unshed tears. She nodded. Rosa's hands trembled as she gently tilted the girl's head toward the light. And that's when she saw it. Something faint, something dark, shifting deep inside Isabella's ear. Her eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. Rosa couldn't sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of her small room, replaying the image over and over in her mind. Isabella's face twisted in pain, her small fingers scratching desperately at her ear, and that dark shimmer deep inside, something that didn't belong there. What if it's an infection? The thought made her stomach turn. She had seen this before. She had lived this before. Elena's face flashed in her memory, pale, fevered, crying softly in the darkness. "It hurts, Rosa. Please make it stop." Rosa squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the memory away. "Not again. I won't let it happen again." But what could she do? She was just a maid. If she said something, would anyone even listen? The next morning, Isabella didn't come down for breakfast. Rosa stood in the dining room, polishing silverware, her eyes constantly drifting toward the empty chair at the long table. Mrs. Caruso noticed her distraction and snapped her fingers sharply. Rosa, focus. The boss doesn't pay you to daydream. Yes, ma'am. Sorry. But her mind wouldn't settle. Where was Isabella? After the breakfast service, Rosa quietly made her way upstairs. She knew she wasn't supposed to be in the family wing without orders, but something pulled her forward, something stronger than fear. She found Isabella in her playroom, sitting on the floor surrounded by untouched toys. The little girl's hand was pressed against her ear again, her face pale and drawn. Rosa's heart clenched. She knelt down slowly, making sure Isabella could see her before she got too close. Tesoro, she whispered, though she knew the girl couldn't hear. She gently touched Isabella's shoulder. Isabella looked up, her blue eyes glazed with discomfort. She pointed to her ear and made a small gesture, the one Rosa had taught her for hurt. Rosa nodded, her throat tight. She carefully tilted Isabella's head toward the window, letting the morning light fall across her face. There it was again, that dark shape, deeper than before, glistening faintly like something wet and alive. Rosa's hands trembled. She wanted to reach for it, to help, but fear held her back. What if I make it worse? What if I hurt her? She pulled back, her mind racing. She needed to tell someone. She needed to get help. Rosa found one of the bodyguards standing in the hallway, a tall man with crossed arms and cold eyes. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly. "Isabella, the boss's daughter. She's in pain. Her ear. There's something wrong." The guard barely glanced at her. "The girl's always got something. The boss knows. It's not your concern." "But not your concern." His tone was final. Rosa stepped back, biting her lip. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand. But she knew better. In a house like this, servants who spoke out of turn didn't last long. That afternoon, she tried again, this time with Mrs. Caruso. "Ma'am, I think Isabella needs a doctor." "Her ear." Mrs. Caruso cut her off with a sharp look. "Mr. Romano has taken his daughter to every specialist in Europe. If they couldn't help her, what makes you think you know better?" "I'm not saying I know better, but then don't say anything at all." The older woman's voice softened slightly. "Girl, I know you mean well, but this family has suffered enough. Don't add to it by overstepping." Rosa lowered her head, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Yes, ma'am." But inside, her resolve only hardened. That night, Rosa knelt beside her bed and prayed. Something she hadn't done with real desperation since the night Elena died. "Dios mío, please, guide me. Show me what to do. I don't want to fail another child. I can't." Her voice cracked. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She thought about Elena's last days. How the doctors had turned them away. How her mother had cried helplessly. How Rosa had sat beside her sister's bed, holding her hand, whispering promises she couldn't keep. "I should have done more," she whispered into the darkness. "I should have fought harder." A memory surfaced, something her grandmother used to say. "Sometimes, Mija, God doesn't send miracles through priests or doctors. Sometimes he sends them through ordinary hands willing to do extraordinary things." Rosa opened her eyes, her jaw set with determination. She wouldn't wait for permission. She wouldn't wait for someone else to act. If no one else would help Isabella, then she would. The next evening, Rosa watched from the hallway as Isabella sat in the library again, the lamplight casting long shadows across her small frame. The girl touched her ear repeatedly, flinching each time, her expression growing more pained. Rosa's breath quickened. She glanced around, the hallway was empty. The other servants were busy with dinner preparations. Even the guards were stationed downstairs. This might be her only chance. She stepped into the library, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. Isabella looked up, her eyes tired and red-rimmed. Rosa knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. She pointed to Isabella's ear, then to herself, making a gesture she hoped meant, "Let me look." Isabella hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. Rosa reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the small silver hairpin she used to fix her uniform. Simple, thin, sterile. She showed it to Isabella, then carefully mimicked what she wanted to do. The little girl's hands trembled. She shook her head slightly. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Tesoro," she whispered, knowing Isabella couldn't hear but hoping somehow the girl would understand. "I won't hurt you. I promise." For a long moment, they stayed frozen. Two people separated by silence but connected by something deeper. Then, slowly, Isabella nodded. Rosa's hands shook as she gently tilted the girl's head toward the lamp. The light fell across Isabella's ear, and there it was, clearer now, more visible. Something dark, something moving. Rosa whispered a prayer and carefully brought the hairpin closer. Just as the tip touched Isabella's skin, a voice like thunder shattered the silence. "What do you think you're doing?" Rosa's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, and there, filling the doorway like a storm, stood Vincenzo Romano. His eyes were dark with fury. Vincenzo's voice had been cold, controlled, a warning. "Stay away from my daughter. That's not a request." Rosa had nodded, retreated, obeyed. But that was yesterday. Tonight, as the grandfather clock downstairs chimed midnight, Rosa stood outside Isabella's bedroom door, her hand trembling on the handle. She knew what she was risking. She knew what happened to people who defied Vincenzo Romano. But she also knew what happened to children whose pain went ignored. The choice had already been made the moment Elena died in her arms. Rosa pushed the door open quietly. Inside, Isabella lay curled on her bed, her small body trembling beneath the silk sheets. Even in the dim light, Rosa could see the sweat beading on her forehead, the way her hand clutched desperately at her ear. Rosa's heart shattered. She crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside the bed. Isabella's eyes fluttered open, red, exhausted, pleading. The little girl's hands moved weakly, forming the sign Rosa had taught her. "Hurts." "I know, Tesoro," Rosa whispered, her voice breaking. "I know it hurts, but I'm going to help you. I promise." She reached into her apron and pulled out the silver hairpin, along with a small candle she'd taken from the chapel. Her hands shook so badly she could barely light the match, but finally, the flame caught. The soft glow illuminated Isabella's face. Pale, frightened, trusting. Rosa positioned the candle on the nightstand and gently lifted Isabella into a sitting position. The girl didn't resist. She simply leaned against Rosa's shoulder, too weak to do anything else. "Dios mío," Rosa whispered, tilting Isabella's head carefully toward the light. "Guide my hand, please." She brought the hairpin closer, her breath shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs. The dark shape inside Isabella's ear seemed to shift, as if sensing the approach. Rosa's hand steadied. Years of caring for Elena, of wishing she could have done more, crystallized into this single moment. She slid the pin in slowly, gently, with a surgeon's impossible precision born from desperation and love. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she felt it, resistance. Something soft, something alive. Rosa's stomach lurched, but she didn't pull back. She adjusted the angle slightly, whispering prayers her grandmother had taught her in childhood. "Santa Maria, Madre de Dios." And then pop. Something gave way. Rosa hooked the pin carefully and pulled. Into her palm slid something small, black, and glistening. It twitched once, then lay still. A parasite wet and unnatural, like it had been engineered rather than born. Rosa gasped, nearly dropping it. Her hand shot out to catch it, disgust and horror flooding through her. But before she could process what she was holding, Isabella jerked upright. The little girl's eyes went wide, wider than Rosa had ever seen them. Her hands flew to her ears, pressing against them as if blocking out sound. Her mouth opened, trembling, confused. And then, in a voice broken and raw and more beautiful than any song, she whispered, "Papa." Time stopped. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at the little girl whose voice she'd never thought she'd hear. "Dios mío," Rosa sobbed, dropping the hairpin. Clattered against the floor. Forgotten. You spoke. You spoke. Isabella looked around the room as if hearing it for the first time. The ticking clock. The wind against the window. The distant sound of water running through pipes. Loud. Isabella whispered, her voice shaking. Everything is loud. Rosa laughed through her tears, pulling the girl into her arms. Yes, Tesoro, yes, that sound. You can hear. The door exploded open. Vincenzo Romano stood in the doorway, his suit jacket gone, his shirt half unbuttoned, his face twisted with fury and fear. Behind him, 2 bodyguards rushed in, hands already reaching for their weapons. What the hell is going on here? Vincenzo's voice was thunder. Rosa scrambled to her feet, instinctively moving between him and Isabella. The black parasite slipped from her palm onto the floor, leaving a wet trail across the marble. Sir, you. Vincenzo's voice cracked like a whip. He pointed at her, his hand shaking, not with fear, but with rage. I told you to stay away from her. What did you do to my daughter? I didn't hurt her. Rosa's voice broke. She was in pain. She was suffering. Guards. Vincenzo barked. Seize her. Now. The bodyguards moved forward, their faces stone. One grabbed Rosa's arm roughly, yanking her away from the bed. No, wait, please. Rosa struggled, tears streaming down her face. She can hear. She spoke. Don't you understand? She said your name. Enough. Vincenzo roared. His eyes blazed with something dark and dangerous. You touched my daughter without permission. You used that. He pointed at the hairpin on the floor, his face twisted with disgust. That thing on her ear. You could have killed her. I was trying to save her. Rosa sobbed. But Vincenzo wasn't listening. He rushed past her to Isabella, scooping the little girl into his arms. She clung to him, her small hands clutching his shirt. Take the maid to the holding room, Vincenzo ordered coldly, not even looking at Rosa. Lock her in. I'll deal with her later. No! Rosa screamed as the guards dragged her toward the door. Please, just listen to her. Just listen. She was halfway through the doorway when it happened. A sound cut through the chaos, small, sharp, desperate. Rosa! Everyone froze. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't hesitant. It was a scream. Isabella's first real scream, raw and terrified and heartbreakingly clear. Rosa! Don't take Rosa! The room fell silent. Vincenzo's arms went slack. His face drained of all color. He stared down at the little girl in his arms as if she were a ghost. What? His voice was barely a whisper. What did you? Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Papa, she said again, louder this time, her voice trembling. Don't hurt Rosa. She helped me. I can hear you, Papa. I can hear you. Vincenzo's legs nearly gave out. He sank to his knees, still holding his daughter, his entire body shaking. She spoke. He whispered to no one, to everyone, to God himself. She spoke. The guards stood frozen, their hands still gripping Rosa's arms but no longer pulling. And in that impossible moment, as a father heard his daughter's voice for the first time in 6 years, the world held its breath. Rosa sagged in the guard's grip, sobbing quietly. She spoke. Vincenzo repeated, his voice cracking. A single tear slid down his cheek. His eyes slowly lifted to Rosa, no longer filled with rage, but with something else. Shock, confusion, and the faintest glimmer of something that might have been gratitude or fear. By dawn, the Romano mansion had transformed into a medical fortress. Black sedans lined the driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the rising sun. Men in expensive suits and white coats hurried through the marble halls, carrying cases filled with equipment Rosa had never seen before. Vincenzo had made calls, urgent, powerful calls to people who didn't say no to him. Within hours, specialists had been summoned from Milan, Geneva, and London. The best minds money could buy, all converging on a single question. What had been inside his daughter's ear? Rosa heard all of this from the basement. She sat on a cold concrete floor, her back against the damp wall, her wrist sore from where the guards had gripped her. They hadn't hurt her, not really, but they hadn't been gentle either. The door was locked. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering occasionally. She pressed her hands together and prayed, her lips moving silently. Padre nuestro que estás en los cielos. The words came automatically, a rhythm she'd learned as a child. But beneath them ran a current of fear. What would happen to her now? Would Vincenzo believe she'd helped Isabella? Or would he see her as a threat, someone who'd overstepped so far there was no coming back? She thought of Isabella's voice, that beautiful broken word, Papa. Even if they threw her out, even if they sent her away forever, it had been worth it. The little girl could hear. Upstairs, in Vincenzo's private study, the atmosphere was suffocating. 3 specialists stood around a sleek glass table where the parasite lay preserved in a clear container. One of them, Dr. Castellano from Milan, a gray-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned closer with a magnifying glass, his brow furrowed. After several long minutes, he straightened. His face had gone pale. "Mr. Romano," he said quietly, removing his glasses. "You need to see this." Vincenzo moved forward, his jaw tight. He'd barely slept. His shirt was rumpled, his hair disheveled. A version of himself no one ever saw. "What is it?" Dr. Castellano gestured to the container. "This organism, it's not natural." The room went still. "What do you mean, not natural?" Vincenzo's voice was dangerously calm. The doctor from Geneva, a younger woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward, holding up a tablet displaying microscopic images. "It's synthetic, Mr. Romano. Bioengineered. Someone made this." Vincenzo's hands slowly curled into fists. "You're telling me this thing is man-made?" "Yes." Dr. Castellano's voice was grim. "It's been modified at a cellular level. See these structures here?" He pointed to the screen. "They're designed to attach to auditory nerves and create a blockage, essentially rendering the host deaf. But it's precise. Surgical, almost. Whoever created this knew exactly what they were doing." The words hung in the air like poison. "Implanted." Vincenzo repeated slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're saying someone deliberately put this inside my daughter?" "I'm afraid so." The London specialist, an older man with a clipped British accent, crossed his arms. This wasn't an accident or a natural infection. This was sabotage. Vincenzo's world tilted. For 6 years, he had believed his daughter's deafness was fate, a cruel twist of biology. God's punishment, perhaps, for the life he led. He had mourned it, fought against it, thrown millions at trying to fix something he thought was unfixable. But it hadn't been fate at all. It had been intentional. Someone had hurt his daughter. Someone had stolen 6 years of her voice, 6 years of her hearing, 6 years of her childhood. Deliberately, methodically, cruelly. "Get out," Vincenzo said quietly. The doctors exchanged glances. "Sir, we should run more tests. Get out." His voice was steel. "All of you. Now." They left quickly, the door closing behind them with a soft click. Vincenzo stood alone in the study, his breathing shallow, his hands shaking with a rage so deep it felt like it might consume him whole. He walked to his desk and sank into the leather chair. His eyes fell on the silver-framed photograph beside his computer. Luciana, his wife, smiling in the garden a week before Isabella was born. She'd been so happy that day, her hand resting on her swollen belly, her eyes bright with hope. Who would do this? Vincenzo whispered to the photograph, his voice breaking. Who would hurt our daughter? The question echoed in the empty room. And then, like a ghost rising from the past, he heard her voice. Not a memory, but words. Real words from their last conversation. Spoken in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and death. Luciana had been fading, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. The doctors said there was nothing more they could do. Internal bleeding, complications from the birth. Vincenzo had held her hand, begging her to stay. And with her final breaths, She'd grabbed his collar weakly, pulling him close. Her voice had been barely a whisper, urgent and afraid. "Vincenzo, promise me, don't trust them." "Who?" he'd asked desperately. "Don't trust who?" Her eyes had locked onto his, wide with something that looked like terror. "The Marcellis. Don't trust anyone from the Marcelli family. They wanted to help with the hospital bills. They said," she coughed, blood flecking her lips, "they said they'd take care of everything. But their eyes, Vincenzo, something was wrong." She died minutes later, the words left unfinished. At the time, Vincenzo had thought it was delirium. The medication, the pain, fear. The Marcellis were rivals, yes, but they couldn't. He froze. The hospital where Isabella was born. The one with the state-of-the-art neonatal unit. The one that had waived all their fees, claiming it was a gesture of respect between families. The one that had been funded, renovated, by the Marcelli family just months before Luciana gave birth. Vincenzo's blood turned to ice. "No!" He shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. His hands slammed against the desk, the photograph rattling. "They touched my blood," he whispered, his voice shaking with fury. "They touched my daughter." For years, the Marcellis had tried to destroy him. Through business, through intimidation, through violence. But this was beyond war. This was evil. They had used his wife's pregnancy. They had used his daughter's birth, the most sacred, vulnerable moment of his life, to plant something inside her, to cripple her, to make him weak. And it had worked. For 6 years, Vincenzo had been paralyzed by grief and helplessness while they watched, while they laughed. His hand shot out, grabbing the phone on his desk. He dialed a number from memory, one that was never written down, never saved. It rang once. "Get the car," Vincenzo said, his voice cold and flat. "And call everyone. I want every soldier we have ready within the hour." A pause on the other end. "Where are we going, boss?" Vincenzo's eyes were dark, empty of everything except rage. "The Marcelli estate. It's time they learned what happens when you touch my family." He hung up without waiting for a response and strode toward the door. Behind him, Luciana's photograph watched silently from the desk, her smile frozen in a moment of hope that had died 6 years ago. But tonight, Vincenzo would make sure someone paid for stealing it. The private hospital on the edge of Naples had always prided itself on discretion. Its marble facade gleamed under expensive lighting. Its waiting room smelled of lavender and money. Celebrities came here, politicians, people who valued privacy above all else. But tonight, discretion shattered like glass. Vincenzo Romano's convoy pulled up at 2:47 a.m. 6 black SUVs, engines growling, headlights cutting through the darkness like judgment itself. Before security could react, his men poured out, moving with military precision. Vincenzo walked through the front doors as if he owned them. In a way, he did, or at least, he owned the fear that kept them open. The night receptionist's face went white. "Mr. Romano, visiting hours. Where's the director?" His voice was ice. He's not here at this hour, sir." Vincenzo leaned across the desk, his eyes dark and empty. "Then call him. Tell him he has 10 minutes to get here, or I burn this place to the ground with everyone inside." The receptionist's hands shook as she reached for the phone. 8 minutes later, Dr. Rizzo arrived, hastily dressed, his thinning hair disheveled. "Mr. Romano, what's the meaning of?" Vincenzo grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "My daughter was born here 6 years ago, and someone put something inside her ear. Something synthetic." The color drained from Rizzo's face. I don't know what you're talking about." "Wrong answer." Vincenzo nodded to his men. Within seconds, they disabled the security system and were moving through the hospital like ghosts. Doors were kicked open. Filing cabinets ransacked. Computer systems accessed with equipment that shouldn't have existed outside intelligence agencies. "Mr. Romano, you can't just watch me." 20 minutes later, they found it. A hidden server room behind a false wall in the administrative wing. Inside, files, video recordings, payment ledgers. All encrypted, all buried, but not buried deep enough. Vincenzo's tech specialist, a young man with tattoos covering both arms, worked quickly, his fingers flying across a laptop. "Boss, you need to see this." The screen filled with documents, clinical trials, consent forms that were never signed. And at the center of it all, Project Silenzio. Vincenzo's blood ran cold as he read. Biotech initiative funded by Marcelli Enterprises. Objective: development of neural control devices for strategic placement in children of rival families. Applications include induced deafness, behavioral modification, long-term leverage. There were names, dates, payments, and photographs, including one of a newborn baby with dark hair and blue eyes. Isabella. Vincenzo's hands shook as he scrolled through the files. The Marcellis hadn't just targeted him. There were others, a senator's son, a judge's daughter, heirs to banking empires. All treated at this hospital. All implanted with devices during routine procedures. It was blackmail, insurance, control. If a powerful man stepped out of line, the Marcellis could activate these devices, threaten worse, or simply watch their enemies crumble under the weight of their children's suffering. They weaponized children, Vincenzo whispered, his voice hollow. They turned babies into hostages. For the first time in 20 years, Vincenzo Romano felt something beyond rage. He felt horror. "Copy everything," he ordered. "Every file, every video, every payment record." "What are you going to do, boss?" Vincenzo's smile was cold and terrible. "I'm going to end them." By sunrise, footage had leaked to every major news outlet in Italy. Anonymous emails containing encrypted files. USB drives delivered to journalists' homes. Video evidence uploaded to servers across 3 continents. The media exploded. Secret biotech experiments on children of Italian elite. Marcelli crime family implicated in hospital scandal. Modified parasites used to control powerful families. The headlines screamed across television screens, newspapers, social media. Within hours, the story had gone international. Vincenzo didn't fire a single bullet. He didn't need to. He destroyed the Marcellis with something far more powerful. The truth. Their business partners cut ties immediately. Banks froze their accounts. Politicians who'd taken their money scrambled to distance themselves. Even other crime families turned their backs. There were rules even in their world, and what the Marcellis had done violated all of them. By noon, police had raided the hospital. Dr. Rizzo was arrested in his office, still trying to delete files. 2 Marcelli captains were taken into custody at the airport, trying to flee. Vincenzo watched the news footage from his study, his face expressionless. His empire remained untouched. He'd made sure of that. The evidence carefully excluded his own dealings, focusing solely on the Marcelli's crimes. Within a week, the Marcelli empire had collapsed. Assets seized. Holdings dissolved. Their patriarch arrested on charges of conspiracy, child endangerment, and racketeering. They hadn't been killed. They'd been erased. Vincenzo's vengeance was surgical, precise, absolute. And when it was done, he felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Only emptiness. "Boss." One of his men appeared at the door. "What about the maid?" "She's still in the basement." Vincenzo closed his eyes. In the chaos of the last 12 hours, he'd almost forgotten. Rosa. The woman who'd risked everything. Who'd seen what no one else had seen. Who'd done what no doctor, no specialist, no amount of money could do. "Bring her to me," he said quietly. "Now." When Rosa was led into the study, she looked small and broken. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her uniform was torn and dirty. Her hands trembled as the guards released her. She stood before Vincenzo's desk, her head bowed, waiting for judgment. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he spoke, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "She called your name all night." Rosa's head lifted slightly. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "After you were taken away," Vincenzo continued, his throat tight. "Isabella cried for hours. She kept saying your name, over and over. Rosa, Rosa." It was the only word she wanted to say. Rosa's lips trembled. Is she okay? Before Vincenzo could answer, the door burst open. Rosa! Isabella stood in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her face lit up with desperate joy. She didn't wait for permission. She ran across the room and threw herself into Rosa's arms. Rosa! You're here. You're okay. Rosa collapsed to her knees, sobbing, holding the little girl as if she'd never let go. Oh, Tesoro, yes, I'm okay. I'm okay. Papa made them let you go, Isabella said, pulling back to look at her. I told him he had to. I told him you saved me. Rosa looked up at Vincenzo, tears streaming down her face. He stood behind his desk, this man who commanded empires and instilled fear in the hearts of powerful men. But in this moment he looked lost, broken, human. You gave her back her voice, he said quietly, his own voice cracking. You gave me everything. Isabella turned to her father, still holding Rosa's hand. She's my friend, Papa. My best friend. Vincenzo's eyes glistened. He nodded slowly. I know, piccola mia. I know. And for the first time since his wife had died, Vincenzo Romano allowed himself to cry. 3 weeks later, the Romano mansion had transformed into something Vincenzo barely recognized. Sunlight poured through windows that had been kept curtained for years. Music drifted from the grand piano in the sitting room, not played by a hired musician, but by Isabella herself, her small fingers pressing keys with clumsy joy, giggling at every note. The silence was gone. In its place, life. Vincenzo stood at the top of the staircase, watching as Rosa knelt beside his daughter in the garden courtyard below. Through the open French doors, he could hear their voices. Say it again, Tesoro, Rosa encouraged gently. Bird. But RD, Isabella tried, her face scrunched in concentration. Almost. Bird. Bird. Isabella squealed, then dissolved into giggles. I said it. Did you hear me say it? Rosa laughed, the sound bright and warm. Yes. You're doing so well. Isabella spotted a sparrow hopping across the fountain's edge and shouted with pure delight. Look, Rosa. A bird. A real bird. I can hear it singing. Vincenzo's throat tightened. His eyes grew moist. For 6 years, this house had been a tomb. Beautiful, expensive, suffocating. He'd moved through it like a ghost, haunted by the child he couldn't reach and the wife he'd lost. But now, his daughter's laughter filled every corner. He descended the stairs slowly, his footsteps no longer heavy with grief, but with something he'd almost forgotten, hope. When he reached the courtyard, Rosa looked up and immediately started to rise. Mr. Romano, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. Stay, he said softly, holding up a hand. Please. She settled back down, though her posture remained respectful. Isabella ran to her father, grabbing his hand. Papa, I said bird. Did you hear me? He knelt down, cupping her small face in his hands. I heard you, piccola mia. You're doing wonderfully. Isabella beamed, then ran back to chase another sparrow across the grass. Vincenzo stood beside Rosa, both of them watching the girl play. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Vincenzo broke the silence, his voice low and rough. I've killed men for less than what you did. Rosa's breath caught. She didn't look at him, but her hands folded tightly in her lap. I've ended lives over disrespect, over mistakes, over whispers. He paused, watching his daughter twirl in the sunlight. But you broke every rule in my house. You defied me. You touched my daughter without permission. Rosa closed her eyes, waiting for whatever came next. And you gave me life. Her eyes opened wide with shock. She turned to look at him. Vincenzo's face was unguarded, no mask, no armor. Just a father looking at the woman who'd saved his child. I don't know how to thank you for what you did. I don't have words for it. Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. You don't need to thank me, sir. Yes, I do. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes glistening. My entire world is built on power, control. But I couldn't control this. I couldn't fix her. I threw millions at the problem, and it meant nothing. His voice cracked. But you listened when everyone else turned away. That's all I did, Rosa said softly, tears rolling down her cheeks. I just listened. I just paid attention. That's everything, Vincenzo said. They stood in silence, watching Isabella discover sounds. The crunch of gravel under her feet, the splash of water in the fountain, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Every noise was a miracle to her, and every miracle broke and rebuilt her father's heart. 2 days later, Vincenzo called a press conference. The media had been circling for weeks, hungry for more details about the hospital scandal, the Marcelli collapse, and rumors about the Don's daughter. Vincenzo gave them something else entirely. Standing behind a podium, flanked by lawyers and foundation organizers, he announced the creation of the Luciana Foundation, named after his late wife. My daughter was denied her voice for 6 years, he said, his voice steady but his hands gripping the podium's edges. Not by fate but by cruelty. But she was fortunate, she had resources. She had people who cared. Many children don't. He paused, his jaw tight with emotion. This foundation will provide free hearing care, treatment and support for children whose families cannot afford it. No child should live in silence because of money. No parent should feel the helplessness I felt. The press erupted with questions, cameras flashing. But Vincenzo simply walked away, leaving the lawyers to handle the details. Within weeks, the foundation had opened its doors. The press called it the Don's Miracle. Some saw it as redemption, others as public relations. Vincenzo didn't care what they called it. He only cared that it worked. Rosa was named head of the foundation's childcare division. She protested at first. I'm just a maid, sir. I don't have the qualifications. But Vincenzo wouldn't hear it. You have the only qualification that matters, he told her. You see children as people, not problems. She accepted, tears in her eyes. One evening, as autumn settled over Naples, Vincenzo sat in Isabella's room while she prepared for bed. She'd been talking nonstop all day, still clumsy with words, but improving every hour. As he tucked her in, she looked up at him with those bright blue eyes and said something that stopped his heart. You sound kind, Papa. Vincenzo froze, his hand still smoothing her blanket. What? Your voice? Isabella said, smiling sleepily. It sounds kind, warm, like a hug. His vision blurred. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. She'd never heard him before. For 6 years, she'd known him only through touch and sight, never sound. She'd never known if his voice was harsh or gentle, cold or warm. And now, hearing him for the first time, she thought he sounded kind. Vincenzo broke. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, his shoulders shaking as tears streamed down his face. And you, he whispered brokenly, you sound like love, piccola mia. You sound like everything I thought I'd lost. Isabella wrapped her small arms around his neck, holding him as he cried. The first time she'd ever heard her father weep. Later that night, as Vincenzo walked through the mansion, he paused in the entrance hall. From somewhere upstairs came Isabella's voice, singing off-key, making up words, giggling at her own mistakes. From the kitchen came Rosa's gentle corrections and encouragement. From the sitting room came the soft notes of the piano, played hesitantly but joyfully. The mansion that had once been silent, that had once felt like a beautiful prison, now echoed with life, with laughter, with sound. Vincenzo closed his eyes and let it wash over him. Every imperfect note, every giggle, every word. And for the first time since his wife had died, he smiled. Not the cold smile of a man who'd won, but the broken, grateful smile of a man who'd been given a second chance. Evening settled over the Romano estate like a gentle blessing. The sky had melted into shades of amber and purple, the sun dipping below the hills of Naples, leaving behind a warmth that lingered in the air. The courtyard fountain trickled softly, its rhythm steady and soothing. A sound Vincenzo had heard 1,000 times before but never truly listened to, until now. He stood on the second-floor balcony, his hands resting on the iron railing, watching the scene below with quiet wonder. Rosa and Isabella moved through the garden like dancers in a dream, chasing fireflies that blinked like tiny stars in the gathering darkness. Isabella's laughter rang out, pure, unfiltered, alive. Every time she caught one in her cupped hands, only to release it and watch it float away. "Look, Rosa, another one!" she called out, her voice bright with joy. "I see it, Tesoro. Be gentle." I am. Vincenzo's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, yes. Relief. But also something deeper. Something that felt like coming home after being lost for a very long time. Behind him, the house hummed with quiet activity. Staff moved through the halls without fear now, their conversations soft but real. Music played from somewhere distant, a radio, perhaps, or Isabella's clumsy attempts at the piano earlier. The silence that had once defined this place had been replaced by something infinitely more precious. Life. Once, the world feared Vincenzo Romano, the man who could silence anyone with a word, a look, a gesture. His power was absolute, his control unquestionable. To cross him meant disappearing into the night, never to return. But all that power couldn't break the silence in his own home. It took one young maid, a woman with calloused hands and a wounded heart, to teach him the truth, that love speaks louder than fear, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pay attention when everyone else looks away, and that miracles don't always come from the places we expect. Rosa noticed him watching and waved up at the balcony, her smile gentle. Isabella followed her gaze and waved too, calling out, "Papa, come down. The fireflies are beautiful." Vincenzo smiled, a real smile, soft and unguarded, and made his way down the stairs. By the time he reached the courtyard, Isabella had run off to chase another cluster of lights near the rose bushes. Rosa stood by the fountain, her fingers trailing in the water, her face peaceful. Vincenzo approached slowly, standing beside her in comfortable silence. For a long moment, they simply watched Isabella play, the fountain's gentle music filling the space between them. Finally, Vincenzo spoke, his voice low and sincere. "I've been thinking about what to say to you, how to properly thank you." Rosa shook her head gently. "You don't need to." "I do," he interrupted softly. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes clear and honest. "You didn't just give her hearing, Rosa. You gave me mine." She looked up at him, confused. "Sir, I was deaf in my own way," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I heard everything, every conversation, every threat, every lie. But I wasn't listening. I couldn't hear what mattered most." He glanced at Isabella, who was now sitting on the grass, watching fireflies with wonder. "I couldn't hear my daughter's pain, couldn't hear the silence screaming at me to do something different." Rosa's eyes glistened with tears. "You taught me to listen," Vincenzo said. "Really listen. And in doing that, you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Rosa smiled through her tears, her voice gentle. "Sometimes we all just need someone to listen, Mr. Romano. That's all. Someone who cares enough to pay attention." He nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him like grace. Isabella suddenly appeared between them, grabbing both their hands. "Come on, both of you. You have to see this." She pulled them toward the fountain, where dozens of fireflies had gathered, their lights blinking in a mesmerizing pattern against the darkening sky. "Listen," Isabella whispered, tilting her head. "Can you hear it? The water sounds like music." Vincenzo knelt beside his daughter, listening to the fountain's gentle trickle. She was right, it did sound like music. Simple, steady, beautiful. Isabella began clapping softly, matching the rhythm of the water. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Rosa joined in, then Vincenzo, the three of them creating a gentle percussion that blended with the fountain's song. And in that moment, surrounded by fireflies and the sound of water and his daughter's laughter, Vincenzo Romano understood something he'd never grasped in all his years of power, that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or controlled. They could only be received with an open heart. Dear viewers, this story isn't just about a maid who saved a child, or a mafia boss who found redemption. It's about all of us, about the silences we carry, the pain we ignore, and the courage it takes to truly listen to one another. Vincenzo Romano once ruled through fear and silence. But he learned that silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's the absence of love. It's the absence of attention, of care, of someone willing to see past the surface and reach into the pain beneath. And when love returns, when someone finally listens, even the quietest hearts begin to sing again. The camera pulls back slowly, the courtyard bathed in twilight. Isabella claps to the rhythm of the fountain, her laughter mixing with the sound of water and wind. Rosa stands beside her, smiling, one hand resting gently on the child's shoulder. And Vincenzo, the feared Don of Naples, kneels beside them both, his face lifted toward the sky, his eyes closed, simply listening. The fireflies dance around them like blessings. The fountain continues its gentle song. And the mansion that was once a tomb of silence has become a home filled with the most beautiful sound of all: love. Sometimes the smallest act of courage can break through the deepest silence, and even make the impossible happen. For Isabella, who found her voice. For Rosa, who listened when no one else would. And for Vincenzo, who learned that true power comes not from silence, but from learning to hear. Thank you, my friends, for staying to the end of this story. If you have not, please kindly subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment where you are watching from and what time it's at your end. Thank you.